the patch was still warm. That was the thing nobody mentioned later, when the stories got told and retold around fires and in diners along Highway 10. When Danny Reyes pulled that leather vest from the cardboard box sitting on his front porch in Tucson at 2:17 in the morning, the patch on the back, the Iron Hawk of the Desert Ironhawks motorcycle club, was still warm, as if someone had been wearing it minutes before. As if the man who'd left it had walked away only seconds ahead of Danny's headlights sweeping the drive. He stood there in bare feet on the concrete, the June air already pushing 90 even at that hour, and turned the vest over in his hands. The name stitched inside the collar read, Hector. And tucked into the breast pocket, folded twice, was a note written in pencil on the back of a gas station receipt. Danny didn't open it. He pressed it flat against his palm and looked out at the empty road, at the streetlight where moths circled without rest, and something locked up in his chest like a door shutting in a house nobody would ever return to. He'd left the Desert Ironhawks 3 years ago. He hadn't planned on going back. But here was Hector's vest, still warm, and there was the note he wasn't ready to read, and somewhere out there in the dark between Tucson and the California line, something was coming apart. This is a story about what it costs a man to ride back toward a fire he once chose to walk away from. About the kind of loyalty that doesn't announce itself, the kind that just climbs on a bike at 2 in the morning and rides. It is a story about Danny Reyes, who was not a hero in any magazine sense of the word, and about the Desert Ironhawks, who were not saints, and about 437 miles of desert highway that would demand everything a 1985 Kawasaki Ninja GPz900R had left in her frame, and everything Danny had left in his. It starts the way most true things start. Quietly. With a box. With a name stitched in thread. With a patch that should have been cold. Danny set the vest on the kitchen table and put a cup of water on to boil, an old habit, his grandmother's cure for every night that didn't make sense, and he stood at the counter and looked at the receipt. He smoothed it against the formica. The handwriting was Hector's, small, careful, each letter leaning slightly to the left as if bracing against wind. Hector Villarreal had learned to write that way in a prison classroom in Yuma, Arizona, where a teacher named Mrs. Caldwell had spent Tuesday afternoons with a group of men who were trying to become something the world hadn't given them room to be. Hector talked about Mrs. Caldwell the way some men talked about their mothers. With that particular tenderness that only comes from being taught something important when you believed you were past learning. The note said, Danny. Club's finished. Someone turned Manny in. Feds came Tuesday. I'm the only one left walking free and I don't know for how long. Manny says he'd rather go down than have you come back. I say that ain't his choice. Come if you can. El Pájaro knows where I am. Don't bring anything you can't lose. That was all. Danny read it twice. Then he looked at the water, which had begun to tremble in the pot but hadn't yet reached the boil. He turned the burner off. He folded the receipt and put it in his shirt pocket. He sat down at the table with Hector's vest in front of him and he sat there for a long time, long enough for the water to go completely cold, long enough for the moths outside to find whatever they were looking for or give up and find something else, and he thought about a man named Manny Cruz and the years that lay between them like a highway nobody had agreed to close. Manuel Cruz had founded the Desert Ironhawks in 1987 on the principle that returning veterans with records didn't have to disappear into their damage. Manny himself had come back from Vietnam in 1971 with a Purple Heart, a shattered left knee, and a charge of aggravated assault that stemmed from an incident in a bar in Albuquerque that any man who'd been where Manny had been would understand, even if no jury in New Mexico at the time was willing to. He'd done 18 months. He'd come out and tried the ordinary world, the construction jobs, the apartment in Phoenix, the attempts at normalcy that felt like wearing someone else's shoes, and eventually he'd done what some men do when the ordinary world doesn't fit, he'd built his own. The Desert Ironhawks started with 7 members and a bar called the Porch on South 4th Avenue in Tucson. They rode together, they looked out for one another, they stayed mostly on the right side of a line that was, Danny had to admit, not always perfectly drawn. They helped veterans. They showed up at funerals for brothers who had no one else to call. They passed the hat when a member's kid got sick or a wife needed a lawyer. They were complicated men living in a world that preferred its men simple. Danny had joined in 1994, 3 years after his own discharge from Fort Bragg, when he was 26 and working a gravel pit outside Marana and drinking too much of the wrong things. Hector had found him, the way Hector found everyone, by noticing the particular kind of loneliness that a man wears when he's stopped hoping anyone will see it. They'd ridden together to a Sunday morning gathering at the Porch, and Manny had looked Danny over the way a man looks at a horse he's thinking of trusting, and that had been that. For 8 years, Danny had been an Ironhawk. He'd left in 2002 after something happened that he and Manny had never fully resolved, a situation involving a delivery that Danny had refused to make, and the 3 days of silence that followed, and the conversation in Manny's garage that ended with Danny placing his own patch on the workbench and walking out into the Arizona heat without looking back. He'd taken the GPz900R because it was his, bought with his own money, rebuilt with his own hands, and because some things a man doesn't leave behind. He thought about all of this at the kitchen table while Hector's vest lay before him like an artifact of a country he used to live in. Then he went to the bedroom. He pulled his riding boots from under the bed. He checked the gear in his chest of drawers, the worn leather jacket with the quilted lining, the gloves with the knuckle armor, the bandana he'd bought at a truck stop in Lordsburg, New Mexico, in 1999 and kept ever since because it was the color of a high desert sky and it reminded him that the sky was still there even when he couldn't see it. He laced his boots and went to the garage. The Kawasaki Ninja GPz900R sat on her center stand in the middle of a concrete floor that Danny kept cleaner than his kitchen. She was the original Ninja, the machine that in 1984 had reset the world's understanding of what a motorcycle could do, and Danny had found this particular one in a junkyard in 1996, spent 2 years restoring her to something better than factory, and had not once regretted a single hour of that work. She was black with a red pinstripe that someone at a shop in Bisbee had laid down by hand. Her inline 4 made a sound at full throttle that Danny had never found words for, only feelings. He checked her tire pressure. He checked her oil. He topped her fuel tank from the red plastic jug he kept in the corner. He pulled her off the center stand, walked her to the garage door, and listened. The night was still. Somewhere in the neighborhood a dog barked twice and stopped. He looked at the clock on the garage wall. 2:53. He thought, 437 miles to El Centro, California, which is where El Pajaro, a man named Rogelio Fuentes who had run the Ironhawks California contacts for 15 years, kept a shop on 8th Street and knew everything worth knowing about where a man in trouble might go to ground. He thought, the weather service had mentioned something. Something about the desert between Tucson and Yuma. He put on his helmet. He pulled onto the street. He pointed the Ninja west. Highway 86 out of Tucson runs through the Tejano O'odham Nation and into the Organ Pipe Cactus National Monument before joining Interstate 8 at Gila Bend. At 3 in the morning it is one of the loneliest roads in the continental United States. The saguaros stand in the headlight wash like men who have stopped walking and decided to simply wait. The sky overhead at that hour, with no moon and no clouds and no human light for miles in any direction, is so full of stars that it stops feeling like sky and starts feeling like something a person shouldn't look at too directly. Danny had ridden this road 100 times. He knew where it curved and where it lied about curving. He knew the section past Y, Arizona, where the pavement had been repaired so many times it had developed its own texture, a kind of corrugated honesty, as if the road itself was admitting it had been through a lot. He ran the Ninja at 75 and felt the warm air pulling at his jacket and thought about nothing except the road and the night and the distance ahead. At Gila Bend he stopped for fuel at a Flying J truck stop where a young woman behind the counter was watching a nature documentary on her phone with the sound off. She didn't look up when he paid. He bought a bottle of water and drank half of it standing next to the bike, looking west along Interstate 8 toward a darkness that had started to look different, heavier, lower, less like night and more like something that had come to stay. He noticed it first as a smell. If you have never smelled a desert haboob approaching from 50 miles out, the closest description is this: take clean air and set it on its edge. There is an electricity in it, a mineral sharpness, the ghost of every dry mile of ground the wind has already crossed. Dust that was once a lakebed. Dust that was once the floor of a sea before there were people to know what a sea was. Danny set down his water bottle. He looked at the sky. The stars to the west were gone. The wall was coming. Not metaphorically, a haboob is, in the most literal sense, a wall of dust that can rise 10,000 feet and stretch 40 miles across and swallow a horizon in minutes. He'd seen them before. He'd never ridden through one by choice. He went back inside and asked the woman at the counter what was coming. She looked up from her phone for the first time. Been watching it on radar. Phoenix said it's moving at 35 miles an hour and it's already past Dateland. She paused. You heading west? He told her he was. She looked at him for a moment with an expression that was neither alarm nor indifference, the particular flat assessment of someone who has lived all her life in a place where the weather regularly tries to kill people. There's a rest stop at Tucson, about 40 miles. That's your best cover if you decide to stop. She went back to her phone. If you decide to. He stood there another moment. Then he went outside and looked west again, and the wind had already started, a low, persistent push against his jacket that would have seemed like an ordinary night wind anywhere else. It was the smell underneath it that told the truth. He thought of Hector's vest on the kitchen table. He thought of the note. He thought of Manny Cruz sitting somewhere in the dark facing whatever charges the federal agents had brought on Tuesday, and he thought about the word Hector had used, finished. He put on his helmet. He got on the Ninja. He rode west into the mouth of it. What the road does not tell you about riding into a haboob is that the darkness comes in layers. First the stars disappear, one cluster at a time, as if someone above is pulling a shade across a window from west to east. Then the highway reflectors start to look different, their light scattering sideways instead of returning clean to your eyes, which means the air between you and them is already loaded with particles. Then the temperature drops. Not a lot, 15 degrees, maybe, but after hours of 90-degree desert night, 15 degrees registers in the body like a command. Then the first gust hits. It caught the Ninja broadside somewhere around the Aztec exit, a lateral force that shoved the bike 18 inches across the lane before Danny's weight caught it and brought it back. His hands tightened on the bars. He dropped to 60. Then 50. The wind was coming from the southwest, which meant it was pushing against his right side with the kind of sustained, indifferent power that doesn't notice what it is pushing against. He leaned into it. The Ninja's fairing, which was designed for aerodynamic efficiency in straight-ahead conditions, was catching the gust like a sail on the right side, and Danny was fighting it, not with panic, but with the slow, conscious adjustment of a man who has been in physical argument with machines and weather before and knows that panic spends the energy you need for the next moment. The dust hit 2 minutes later. There is a passage across the Sonoran Desert floor on Interstate 8 between Dateland and Tucson that, under normal circumstances, goes by in a pleasant blur of creosote and far-off mountains. When a haboob consumes it, it becomes something else. It becomes a tunnel made of dust and wind and the narrowed beam of a single headlight that can reach perhaps 40 feet before being swallowed. The Kawasaki's round headlight, which Danny had upgraded to a halogen unit in 2001 but which was still, at its core, a light designed for riding in air that was mostly air, reached into that tunnel and found very little. He dropped to 35 miles an hour. On the interstate. At 4 in the morning. With the dust so thick now that when he breathed through the bandana he'd pulled up over his nose and mouth, he could feel the grit against his lips anyway. His goggles, he'd put them on at the truck stop, old instinct, were filming over with fine particles that smeared when he tried to wipe them with his gloved thumb. The Ninja stayed steady. That was the thing about a machine that a person has rebuilt from the frame out, there is a relationship there that goes past mechanics. Danny knew every vibration in her, every sound, the exact feel of her front tire when it was finding uncertain traction, the way her engine note changed when the air-fuel mixture was being pushed by altitude or heat. He talked to her, though not in words, in small adjustments of throttle and weight, a conversation carried out through his wrists and knees, and she answered back through the handlebars and the seat. He found the Tacna rest stop by almost missing it. The exit sign came up out of the dust and was past him before he read it fully, and he made a decision that was less a decision than a reflex. He downshifted hard, hauled on the brakes, and made the turn with the dust shoving at his back as if impatient with his hesitation. The rest stop had a covered concrete structure with picnic tables. 2 big rigs were already parked there, their drivers presumably inside their cabs, waiting. Danny walked the Ninja under the cover of the structure and put her on the side stand and took his helmet off and breathed. The sound was extraordinary. Out in the open, the wind was a continuous low howl with gusts that peaked and shook the roof of the structure and rattled everything loose. The dust came in horizontally even under the cover, thinner here but still present, settling on his jacket, on the Ninja's black fairing, on the concrete floor in a fine layer that made everything the same dull brown. He sat on a picnic table and drank the second half of his water and looked at the 2 semi-trucks and thought about the men inside them, sleeping or awake, waiting for the world to become crossable again. He pulled out Hector's note. Read it again. Then he pulled out his phone, spotty signal, 1 bar, and sent a single text to a number he'd kept in his phone for 3 years without using. The number was labeled El Pajaro. The text said, "On my way. Hit weather at Tacna. Should be there by noon." 3 minutes later, in the middle of the howling and the dust and the pre-dawn dark, the phone buzzed. The reply said, "I know you're coming. Manny doesn't know yet. Bring the thing he gave you." Danny stared at that last line. The thing he gave you. He knew what it meant. In 1998, on a night ride between Tucson and Globe along Highway 60, Manny had pulled over at a scenic overlook above the Salt River Canyon and stood at the rail and talked for 2 hours about the club, about what he wanted it to become, about the men he'd failed and the men he'd helped and the distance between those 2 lists. At the end of that conversation he'd reached into his saddlebag and brought out a folded paper, a document, typed on an actual typewriter on yellow paper, its edges brown with age. He'd handed it to Danny without explaining what it was and said only, "Keep this somewhere real. Not in a safe. In a place you'll find when you need it." Danny had kept it in the binding of a copy of Steinbeck's East of Eden that sat on the second shelf of his bookcase in Tucson. He had not looked at it in 3 years. He had not thought about it until this moment. He sat in the rest stop at Tacna, Arizona, with the storm blowing itself across the desert, and he understood that he had driven away from Tucson without that document. And that he was going to have to decide, when the storm cleared, whether to go back for it or continue west. The storm blew for 2 hours and 12 minutes. He knew the duration exactly because he watched it on his phone, checking the radar loop on the weather app every 20 minutes, watching the red-orange blob that represented the Habub drift northeast across the screen. When the wind dropped below 30 miles per hour and the visibility returned to something a person could ride in, he packed the bandana, put on his helmet, and started the Ninja. He turned east. It cost him 4 hours and 20 minutes, back to Tucson, into the house, his hand finding the Steinbeck without having to look, the yellow folded paper in his jacket's inner pocket, and then back out onto Interstate 10 headed west through a desert that the Habub had rinsed clean and left sparkling in the early morning light. It was nearly 8 in the morning when he passed Tucson's western edge again. The saguaros wore a faint coating of dust on their south-facing sides and the air smelled of something almost like rain, though there had been none. The Ninja hummed on I-10 at 80 miles an hour and Danny let her run. The engine of a GPz900R at highway cruise is a low, busy, purposeful sound, a sound that is easy to project things onto if you're the kind of person who rides long distances and thinks. Danny was exactly that kind of person. He thought about Manny. He thought about the word turned, someone turned Manny in, and the particular violence of that word, the image it carried of a key in a lock, a face presented to an authority that had no business receiving it. He had known informants before, in the army and after, and what he'd observed about them was not that they were evil, exactly, but that they were afraid in a particular way, afraid of the wrong thing, afraid of the punishment more than the betrayal, running a calculation that looked sound on the surface and was hollow all the way through. Who had turned Manny in? The note didn't say. El Pajaro's text didn't say. He let that question ride with him, somewhere in the wind off the left mirror. He stopped in Yuma for fuel and a breakfast burrito from a gas station that made them fresh, real ones, not the wrapped kind, with eggs and potato and green chili that was actually green chili and not a suggestion of one. He ate it leaning against the Ninja in the parking lot with the sun already high and hot and the Colorado River somewhere beyond the palm trees to the west. A man in a white pickup pulled up next to him and got out and looked at the Kawasaki for a long moment. "Is that an original GPZ?" A voice with a Texas edge to it. Danny said it was. The man walked around it slowly, taking inventory the way a person does when they genuinely know what they're looking at. He was maybe 60, with a white mustache and hands that were familiar with tools. "Haven't seen one of these in," he shook his head. "Where are you headed?" "El Centro." The man looked at the sky, then back at Danny. "You went through last night's storm." "Part of it." The man nodded once, as if that explained something he'd already suspected. He went into the gas station. Danny finished his burrito, wiped his hands on his jeans, and got back on the Ninja. The California line crossed somewhere in the middle of the bridge over the Colorado River, a fact that has always seemed slightly comic. A man can be in two states in the same moment while 60 feet of muddy green water runs beneath him, and then the road drops into the Imperial Valley, which is a remarkable piece of geography that most people speed through without stopping to register. Below sea level. Bone dry except where the irrigation canals bring water from the Colorado. Crops growing in sand that has no right to grow anything. The sky here is enormous and white in the heat of the day, and the air smells of minerals and alfalfa and distance. Danny came off I-8 at the El Centro exit at 11:30. The town arranged itself around him as he rode its streets, a working town, nothing decorative about it, wide flat streets and one-story commercial buildings and a heat that sat on everything like a hand pressing down. He found 8th Street without needing to check his phone. He'd been to El Pajaro's shop twice before. You didn't forget it. The shop was called Fuentes Auto and Cycle, and it occupied a corner lot behind a chain-link fence where 3 vehicles in various states of disassembly stood in the sun with the patient resignation of animals at rest. The building itself was a converted warehouse, its roll-up doors open to the morning, a swamp cooler mounted above one door making a rhythmic sound like a large, contented animal breathing. Danny rolled the Ninja through the open gate and parked. Rogelio Fuentes was under a Chevy Suburban when Danny walked in. He came out from under it on a wheeled creeper, a short man with enormous forearms and a face that had been in the desert sun so long it had achieved a kind of permanence, as if it had stopped aging and simply decided to be what it was. He had a gray braid down his back and a shop rag tucked in his belt, and he looked at Danny for a moment without expression. Then, "Thought you'd be here at noon." He got to his feet, knees cracking. "Storm make you late?" "Storm made me go back." Rogelio looked at his jacket pocket. "You got it?" "I got it." Rogelio nodded and told Danny to come inside. The back of the shop was divided from the working bay by a plywood wall, and behind the wall was a room with a table and chairs and a small kitchen that smelled of coffee and something cooking with cumin. An oscillating fan moved the air in slow sweeps. And at the table, his hands folded around a ceramic mug, sat a man Danny had not seen in 3 years. Hector Villarreal looked up. He was 52 years old and looked it fully. The prison classroom where Mrs. Caldwell had taught him to write had also added the lines around his eyes. His hair had gone fully white. His left arm, the one that had been broken twice, once in Vietnam, once in a parking lot fight in Nogales in 1995 that Danny remembered in granular detail, rested on the table at a slight angle, the elbow that had never quite healed. "You came." Hector's voice was low and steady. Danny sat down across from him. Rogelio poured 2 more coffees without asking and set them on the table and then went back to the shop bay and left them. "Tell me everything," Danny said. So Hector told him. It started, as these things often do, not with a dramatic event but with a series of small decisions that in retrospect formed a pattern that was obvious once you knew how to look at it. A man named Cutter, Gary Cutwell, who had joined the Desert Ironhawks in 1999, a man who rode a 1993 Harley-Davidson Softail and told everyone it was cherry and only Danny and Hector knew it burned oil, had been arrested on an unrelated charge in March. Possession with intent, a state charge in Pima County. He had, according to what Hector's contacts had learned since Tuesday, traded what he knew about the Ironhawks for a deal that reduced his exposure. He had told federal agents about a meeting in January at which Manny Cruz had allegedly agreed to allow the club to serve as cover for a transport operation that Manny had subsequently refused and shut down. The agents had interpreted the initial agreement as sufficient for charges. The charges against Manny were conspiracy and RICO-adjacent counts that, even if ultimately unprovable, would take years and considerable money to fight. 3 other members had been brought in for questioning on Tuesday and were, as of Hector's last information, not talking but not free either. 2 had lawyers. 1 did not. Manny's at his daughter's in Calexico, Hector said. He's out on bond. His daughter put the house up. He set his mug down. He doesn't know I called you. El Pajaro texted me to bring the document. Hector looked at his hands for a moment. That document is why Manny might get through this. What's in it? He stopped. You read it? Once. In '98. Then you know what it says. Danny had read it once, in 1998, on the night Manny gave it to him, by the light of a lantern at the Salt River Canyon overlook. He had been 29 years old and the reading of it had felt like being let in on something enormous and delicate. It's a record, Danny said. Everything the club did. The real record. Dates, names. Every veteran they helped. Every time they turned something down. He stopped. It's Manny's testimony to what the club actually was. And what it refused to be, Hector said. In his own handwriting. On a typewriter he kept because he didn't trust computers. 32 pages. He looked at Danny's jacket pocket. That's his whole defense. The pattern of refusal. The history of what they chose not to do. The room was quiet except for the fan and the sound of Rogelio's wrench in the bay. Danny reached into his jacket and placed the folded yellow paper on the table. Hector looked at it for a long time. He placed his good hand on it. He closed his eyes. Then, we need to get it to Manny's lawyer. There's a woman in El Centro, Adriana Solis, she's out of San Diego but she's been down here since Wednesday working on this. She's good. She's very good. He opened his eyes. And then we need to find out who else knows about Cutter. Because Manny doesn't know yet. He doesn't know who turned him. And when he finds out, he needs to find out from someone he trusts, Danny said. Hector looked at him. He doesn't trust me right now. He thinks I panicked. He thinks I called you because I panicked. Did you? A pause. The fan swept left, swept right. I called you because you're the only person Manny ever trusted with that document. And because you're the only one he was willing to fight with face to face. You're the only one he respected enough to throw out. Hector's voice did something at the end of that sentence, a slight compression, like a fist closing. He still asks about you. Rogelio says he asks about you every time. Danny picked up his coffee. It had gone cool without him noticing. He drank it anyway. He'll see me, he said. Hector nodded once. But first, Danny said, the lawyer. Adriana Solis was in her early 40s and working out of a borrowed office at a law firm on Adams Avenue, and when Danny and Hector walked in at 1:30 in the afternoon she was on the phone and had the specific expression of someone who is holding 3 conversations in her head simultaneously and is annoyed to have a 4th one introduced. She held up a finger without looking at them. Finished her call. Hung up. Looked at them. Her gaze went immediately to the folded yellow paper in Danny's hand. Is that what Hector told me it would be? She came around the desk. Danny placed it in her hands. She unfolded it carefully, the way a person handles something they know is fragile, which is different from the way a person handles something they merely know is important. She read the first page. Then the second. Then she looked up. How long have you had this? 6 years. Danny paused. Then 3 years not being involved. But I had it. She looked at him with an expression that contained several things at once and then set them aside in favor of the practical. I need to copy this today. I need to get it filed in the right place by Friday, because if I can establish the pattern of documented refusal and discovery, she was already moving toward a copier. Where is Manny? Calexico, Hector said. His daughter Elena's house. Can you get him here? Danny and Hector exchanged a look. Hector said, Danny can. Adriana Solis looked at Danny with the flat assessment of someone who has spent 20 years watching whether people mean what they say. She appeared to reach a conclusion she kept to herself. Get him here by 5 o'clock, she said. I'll be ready. In the parking lot, Hector reached into the pocket of his vest, not his own vest, a plain denim one he'd borrowed from somewhere, and brought out a set of keys. I don't have a bike right now. I came out here in Rogelio's truck. He held the keys out. You go. Manny won't throw you out if there's no one to watch. Danny took the keys. Put them in his pocket. Then, Hector. The thing you said. About him asking. Hector shrugged, looking out at the street. He's a proud man. So am I. I know it. A pause. That's why it has to be you. Calexico is 15 miles south of El Centro, pressed against the Mexican border, the town of Mexicali rising on the other side of the fence like a twin that grew up differently. The streets near the border are busy at any hour, commerce and family and the ordinary churn of life that doesn't pause because a fence has been installed through the middle of what was once just geography. Elena Cruz's house was on Heffernan Avenue, a small concrete block house with a yard full of roses that someone tended with real attention, the bushes trimmed, the mulch fresh, the colors arranged in a way that suggested both taste and effort. Danny parked the Ninja at the curb. Sat on her for a moment. Looked at the house. The front door opened before he got off the bike. Manny Cruz stood in the doorway. He was 71 years old. The Vietnam years, the prison time, 3 decades of running the club, and the events of the past week had deposited themselves in his body the way sediment deposits in a river, not catastrophically but consistently, layer on layer, until the shape of a man becomes the record of everything that has moved through him. His left knee had been replaced in 2008 and he walked with a cane that he clearly resented. His hair was white and cut very short. His face was the face of someone who has long since stopped worrying about what impressions it makes. He looked at Danny standing beside the Ninja at the curb, and something moved across his face that he controlled before it could become an expression. He said, "So." Danny walked up the path through the rose garden. They stood 6 feet apart on the porch. The heat was enormous and honest. Somewhere inside the house a television was going, a cooking show, the cheerful cadence of someone explaining something simple. Danny said, "I have something that belongs to you." Manny's eyes moved to Danny's jacket pocket. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Come inside." The kitchen table. Elena brought iced tea without being asked and then disappeared with the tactful grace of someone who understands when rooms need to be emptied. The document sat on the table between them. Manny looked at it without touching it. "You kept it," Manny said. "You told me to. I thought you might have burned it. When you left." Danny shook his head. Manny picked up the iced tea and held it without drinking. His hands, large, scarred at the knuckles, the left one missing the tip of the ring finger from a machinery accident in 1973, held the glass with a care that was almost ceremonial. "I was wrong about the delivery," he said. "In 2002. I handled it badly. I should have." He stopped. "I've gone over it a lot of times." Danny waited. "You were right to refuse. I knew it when you refused it. I was angry because I knew it." The television in the other room shifted to a commercial. Then back. "Hector called you," Manny said. He left your vest on my porch. Manny looked at the table. That vest is for whoever leads the club. There's no club right now, Danny said. There's a lawyer in El Centro who needs you there by 5 o'clock, and there's a document on this table that might be the difference between you going to prison and you not going to prison. I know about the document. Manny looked up. I know what it can do for my case. I've known since Tuesday. A pause. I also know I gave it to you. And I know you could have let this entire thing run its course without coming back into it. He set the iced tea down. So. Why did you? The question sat in the kitchen like a stone dropped in water. Danny was quiet long enough that the answer stopped being something he was finding and became something he was admitting. Because you built something real, he said. Broken in some places. Real in more. And because what Cutter did, he watched Manny's face. You know it was Cutter. Something happened in Manny's eyes. Not surprise, more like the settling of a weight he'd already been carrying and had now confirmed was the right shape. His jaw tightened. He breathed through his nose. He looked at the roses outside the kitchen window for a long time. Gary. The name came out quiet and without inflection, which was worse than if it had come out angry. He was afraid, Danny said. He made the calculation. He was wrong. He was always afraid. Manny's voice was distant, as if he was locating Cutter in some mental map he kept of all the men he'd known. I should have seen it. A pause. I did see it. I thought he'd grow out of it. He looked back at Danny. Some fears you grow out of. Some you don't. You just get better at hiding them until you can't anymore. The afternoon light moved across the kitchen floor in the slow way dessert light moves, thick, orange gold, unhurried. Danny picked up the document and slid it across the table. Manny placed his hand on it. The hand with the missing fingertip. It rested there, on 32 pages of yellow paper that represented 30 years of choices, of refusals, of men helped and mistakes made, and a line held imperfectly but held. Adriana Solis is good, Danny said. She'll know what to do with it. Manny nodded. He stood, slowly, reaching for his cane. He looked out the window at the roses again. Elena planted those herself. She doesn't know I watch her do it from the window. She thinks I don't notice things like that. His voice was very quiet. I notice. I just never learned to say it right. He went to the hallway and called his daughter's name. She appeared at the door. He told her he needed a ride to El Centro, that he'd explain in the truck. She looked at Danny and then at her father, and the expression on her face was the particular expression of someone who has been waiting for something to break open and is relieved to find it finally moving. They drove north together, the three of them in Elena's truck with the Ninja trailing behind, Danny staying within sight of the truck's bumper through the flat agricultural miles between Calexico and El Centro, past the fields of spring mix lettuce and the irrigation lines and the water towers standing in the white sky like exclamation points at the end of a sentence the land had been writing for a century.